I wasn't one to back down from a fight, especially when it came to my own property. If the HOA thought a flimsy fine was enough to intimidate me, they clearly didn't know who they were dealing with. The first call I made was to my lawyer Tim. Tim was sharp, thorough, and most importantly loved taking on HOA disputes. After a brief rundown of Marcia's antics, he chuckled. "They fined you for swimming in your own lake? That's a new one," he said. "Do you have the original deed?" "Better than that," I replied. "I've got the survey documents and the water rights agreement from when I bought the property." "Good. Send everything over. If they're trying to enforce bylaws on land or water they don't own, this could get interesting." While Tim went to work, I started doing some research of my own. The lake was a peculiar piece of real estate, a patchwork of ownerships and easements. Most of the shoreline belonged to individual property owners, but the water itself was another matter. A good chunk of it was part of my original deed, while the rest had been sold off in pieces over the years. After a few hours of digging, I found something that made me sit up straight. The remaining portions of the lake were owned by an old LLC that hadn't been active in decades. A quick search revealed that the LLC's assets, including the lake, were up for sale as part of a liquidation. That's when the idea hit me. If I bought the rest of the lake, I wouldn't just own a portion of it, I'd own the entire thing. I wasted no time. By the end of the week, I'd made an offer, finalized the purchase, and transferred the deed into my name. The LLC's representatives were more than happy to offload the asset, and the process went surprisingly smoothly. Tim called me a day later, his tone a mix of amusement and disbelief. "Let me get this straight," he said. "You didn't just dispute the fine, you bought the whole lake?" "That's right," I said, grinning. "And now I want to use my ownership to make a point." "That's one way to put it," he replied, laughing. "I'll draft the legal notices for you. They won't be able to touch the water without your permission." The next step was notifying the HOA. I drafted a letter addressed to Marcia and her board of busybodies, attaching a copy of the new deed for good measure. Subject: Ownership notification and updated regulations. Dear Marcia, as of date, I am the sole owner of lake name. This includes all water rights, shoreline access, and easements not previously deeded to individual property owners. Effective immediately, the following rules apply. All access to the lake, including recreational activities, requires written permission from the owner. Unauthorized use of the lake will be subject to trespassing fines starting at $10,000. Any previous HOA rules regarding the lake are null and void. Thank you for your cooperation. Sincerely, my name. I dropped off the letter at the HOA office and waited. It didn't take long for the chaos to begin. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing with texts from neighbors. Some were supportive, others confused, and a few downright furious. But it was the email from Marcia that really made my day. Subject: Urgent meeting request. I could almost hear the panic in her typed words. The queen bee had been dethroned, and she didn't like it one bit. Smiling, I leaned back in my chair. This was only the beginning. Life by the lake was everything I had dreamed of when I moved to my little slice of heaven. The mornings greeted me with a misty sunrise over the water, the afternoons were for fishing, and the evenings brought a serene calm with the frogs and crickets singing their symphony. It wasn't much by city standards, a modest cabin and a stretch of land, but it was mine, free and clear. Well, it was mine until the HOA got involved. The HOA here wasn't your typical neighborhood watch. They didn't care about barking dogs or unkempt lawns. No, their self-appointed queen, Marcia, was a different breed of tyrant. Her rules went beyond absurd. She wanted to regulate nature itself. 4 months, I'd been at odds with Marcia and her gaggle of clipboard-wielding followers. First, it was my gravel driveway not being the approved shade of gray. Then they tried to slap me with a fine for the unauthorized color of my garden shed, which happened to match the cabin perfectly. I paid no mind to their antics until last Saturday. I was enjoying a rare afternoon off, floating on an inner tube in my little patch of paradise, when Marcia appeared like a storm cloud on the dock. She wore her usual uniform, oversized sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat, and an air of indignation. "Excuse me," she barked, clipboard in hand. "You can't swim here." I glanced over, water dripping down my face. "It's my lake, Marcia." "Not according to the HOA bylaws," she shot back, brandishing her clipboard like a sword. "This water is for visual enjoyment only. Swimming is strictly prohibited." I paddled closer, squinting at her in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm quite serious," she said, thrusting a paper toward me. "This is your formal notice. A $1,000 fine for unauthorized swimming. I laughed, genuinely thinking it was a joke. You can't fine me for swimming in my own lake. Your portion of the lake, she corrected, her voice dripping with condescension. The HOA controls the rest. That's when it hit me. Marcia and her minions thought they could claim dominion over the lake because their lots backed up to it. Sure, they might have some deeded access, but this wasn't their water to regulate. Good luck enforcing this, I said, shoving the paper back at her. You're out of your depth. Pun intended. Marcia's lips curled into a smirk. We'll see about that. By Monday, the $1,000 fine appeared in my mailbox, along with a letter threatening legal action if I didn't pay. That was the last straw. They wanted to play games? Fine. They'd forgotten one crucial detail about this lake. It wasn't public. Most of it was mine outright, save for a few deeded easements. And if the HOA wanted to tangle with me, I had a plan that would leave them swimming in regret. Smiling to myself, I set down the letter and grabbed my laptop. It was time to make a few calls. By the time the HOA meeting rolled around, the neighborhood was abuzz with speculation. Everyone wanted to know what Marcia and her cronies would do in response to my bold move. I had to admit I was curious too. The meeting was held in the community center, a boxy little building with bad fluorescent lighting and folding chairs that screamed budget cuts. I arrived early, my letter in hand, and took a seat near the front. The usual cast of characters was already assembled, whispering among themselves and casting furtive glances my way. Marcia entered like a general preparing for battle, her clipboard clutched like a shield and her sunglasses perched firmly atop her head, even indoors. She took her place at the head of the table, flanked by her loyal minions, and tapped the microphone to quiet the room. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice carefully measured. As many of you know, we've encountered a situation regarding the lake and its use. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Marcia raised her hand for silence and continued. It seems that one of our residents, Mr. My last name, has purchased the lake in its entirety. The way she said it, you'd think I'd stolen her firstborn. I stood, holding up my letter. Not seems, Marcia. I have the deed right here. Her lips tightened. Be that as it may, this development creates complications for the HOA's established guidelines regarding lake usage. We believe these rules have been beneficial to the community and should remain in place. I couldn't help but laugh. You mean the rules you tried to use to fine me $1,000 for swimming in my own lake? Marcia bristled, her face reddening. The fine was issued in accordance with the HOA bylaws, which no longer apply, I countered. As the sole owner, I've established new regulations. I handed copies of my letter to the other board members, relishing the way Marcia's expression darkened with each page that was passed down the table. You can't just unilaterally impose rules on the community, she said, her voice rising. Actually, I can, I replied. It's private property now, my private property. Any use of the lake without my permission is trespassing, and as outlined in my letter, the penalty starts at $10,000. The room erupted into chaos. Some neighbors shouted their support, while others hurled complaints. Marcia banged her gavel futilely, trying to restore order. Over the next few weeks, I watched as the neighborhood slowly adapted to the new reality. Marcia and her minions tried to rally opposition, but the law was on my side. Tim had ensured the new regulations were airtight, and even the HOA's hired lawyers couldn't find a loophole. I started receiving requests for lake access. Some were polite, others downright groveling. I approved most of them, charging a modest fee to cover maintenance costs. But when Marcia sent in her application, complete with a note insisting she be exempt from the fee, I couldn't resist having a little fun. I sent her a response outlining my special rate for former HOA presidents. $10,000 per hour, payable in advance. The following weekend, I hosted a community barbecue by the lake. Attendance was high, higher than I'd expected given the drama. But people seemed genuinely happy to be there, relieved to have the lake drama behind them. Marcia, conspicuously absent, was the only exception. As I stood by the grill, flipping burgers and laughing with my neighbors, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The lake was mine, and the HOA's reign of pettiness was over. But I wasn't done yet. There was one final move to make, something that would put an end to their nonsense for good. You said. A month after buying the lake, the dust had settled and life was finally peaceful again. The HOA had lost all its leverage over my property, and Marcia's reputation as the queen of petty rules was in tatters. But I wasn't content with just winning. I wanted to make sure no one ever tried to pull a stunt like this again. The first step was practical. I reached out to an environmental consultancy to evaluate the lake's health. Over the years, runoff from the surrounding properties had begun to degrade the water quality. I decided to use the access fees I collected to fund a restoration project, which included building natural filtration areas and planting vegetation to stabilize the shoreline. Not only would this improve the lake, but it also gave me a tangible way to demonstrate the benefits of responsible ownership. The second step was more personal and poetic. I'd noticed that Marcia had been avoiding the lake entirely since the HOA debacle. Her once frequent strolls along the shoreline had ceased, and she'd stopped showing up to community events. So, I decided to extend an olive branch, or more accurately, a branch with a lesson attached. I sent her an invitation to an official lake reopening celebration, complete with a note that read, "Dear Marcia, as a gesture of goodwill, I'd like to invite you to the reopening of the lake. Your RSVP is appreciated. Please note that access will be granted per the updated rules. A complimentary first hour is included as a token of appreciation for your previous interest in lake management." Her RSVP never came, but that didn't matter. The event was a resounding success. Families picnicked along the shore, kids splashed in the water, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. I gave a short speech, highlighting the restoration efforts and emphasizing the importance of community cooperation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the lake in shades of gold and pink, I felt an overwhelming sense of satisfaction. The lake wasn't just a trophy from my battle with the HOA, it was a symbol of standing up for what was right and turning conflict into something meaningful. And Marcia? Well, she might have missed the celebration, but she didn't miss the news coverage. A local reporter had picked up the story, framing it as a tale of triumph against overreach. The headline read, "Lake owner takes a stand, how one resident turned HOA drama into a community victory." It was the cherry on top. The next day, as I sipped my coffee on the dock and watched the lake glisten in the morning sun, I spotted a pair of ducks paddling toward me. They seemed to have claimed my little patch of water as their own, undeterred by rules or boundaries. "Good for you," I murmured, raising my mug.